Hello, and welcome to today's presentation titled Arming with Intelligence, Data Fusion in Tomorrow's Network-Centric Warfare, sponsored by Objectivity. Before we begin, I would like to explain how to participate in today's presentation. First of all, if you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please press the Help button on your player console to receive assistance in solving common issues. This presentation console has been optimized for viewing at a screen resolution of 1024 by 768 or higher. If your screen resolution is set to a lower level than that, you may have difficulty viewing the entire slide. If you need to make adjustments, this can normally be done through the display options in your computer's control panel. If you wish to view this presentation in full screen mode, please click on the full screen button located on your player console. This presentation includes elements that will open a new window on your console. Please make sure to disable any pop-up blockers that you may have installed. For your reference, all lines have been placed into a listen-only mode during the presentation to prevent any background noise. We do, of course, welcome your questions during today's event. In order to submit your questions to today's speakers, simply type them into the question window on the left-hand side of your screen and then hit the Submit button. We will attempt to answer as many questions as possible during our formal question and answer session at the conclusion of today's event. I would now like to turn things over to today's moderator, Kimberly Roberts. Kimberly, please go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you who are joining us for today's live event. As you know, this webinar will be focusing on how to harness technical innovation in the next decade of network-centric warfare. We've got a lot to cover here, but I'm just going to reiterate a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Typically, we get a lot of questions about this, so yes, the slides will be available for download after the event. We'll also have an on-demand file of the webinar that you can access online. We'll also be having a question and answer period, so we welcome your questions. Just type them into your questions box, and we'll go through those at the end of the event. Finally, there's also going to be a brief survey at the end of the webinar, and we just ask you to take a moment to let us know how we're doing and what you think of the webinar. Okay, I think that about covers it, and so now let me introduce our very first speaker. We are so excited to be hosting Fred Stein from the MITRE Corporation. As technology continues to evolve, Fred remains on the cutting edge of his profession as he continues to seek out innovative and new concepts. He is a retired colonel of the United States Army and is now MITRE's Senior Principal Engineer for Network-Centric Warfare. Among Fred's many accomplishments is the book Network-Centric Warfare, which he co-authored with two colleagues, David Alberts and John Gartstedt. He also serves as a member of the Swedish National Advisory Board on Network-Based Defense, an advisor. He's also an advisor to the Department of Defense Office of Force Transformation, and he's also an assistant professor of information warfare and network-centric warfare at the Army War College. He's also a proud recipient of the Arthur K. Zebrowski Award. So welcome, Fred.
Kimberly, welcome. And I have to advise everybody that this is the first webinar I've ever given. The last time I gave this kind of presentation was a week ago in front of 1,300 people at the first cyber conference for the Air Force. And it'll be exciting to hear your comments or read your comments and go through it. Without further ado, I think the first thing we all ought to think about is, are we in fact in a new era? Are we in fact entering the information age? And I think for folks that are working through this right now, the answer to that is absolutely yes. The characteristic of the new age is that it's inhabited by people who were born before 1985 and those born after 85. And your current speaker, I am sad to say, was born significantly before 1985. And as you will see later in a test, considers himself a digital immigrant moving toward digital fossil status. So these changes and innovations in society, economics, business, social, and the military are far-reaching, penetrating, and I think extraordinarily interesting for our period. So the key of any military officer, and I have been one for my whole life virtually because my father was military and I grew up in the military and retired from the military and now work in a military post, is preparing for the next war, not the last one. The picture on your left is a picture of the American Civil War. The picture on your right is a science fiction version of what may be the next one. And warfare here means whether it's kinetic and blowing things up, or whether it's cyber, or whether it's changing hearts and minds of people and making movements toward freedom and democracy, et cetera. So warfare is a generalized term. So what do I mean when I say a digital native is born in 1985? This slide, and I don't know how it comes out on full screen and looking for you, but this slide sort of gives some feeling of what happens to you if you were born in 1985, or nieces or nephews or sons or daughters who were born in 1985. And I think what's extraordinary about it is the pace of change, that the folks born in that era were raised connected, were raised with the expectation of being able to reach out and touch friends on Facebook, were raised in an expectation of not going to the Encyclopedia Britannica or a library, but going to the Internet. And note, by the way, that I don't give any of this whether it's good or bad. It merely is. And I think that's important during this future discussion, is the expectation of these digital natives, for they, in a military sense, fight the war at the front lines. They, in a commercial sense, sell the product on the front line. And the others, the digital immigrants, fossils, or naturalized citizens, often make the decision of what systems to buy, what research to conduct, how much money to spend, what to put on the marketplace. And if we have a disconnect between these two groups of people, as I sometimes feel we do, we have a significant issue. The next slide is a comic strip, and from Doonesbury, one of my favorite comic strips, or excuse me, not Doonesbury, the Pajama Diaries. And I'll skip to the final frame of that one. I'll let you read it later. But basically, the father who has gotten a new cell phone says, are you happy now? And he says, sure. Everybody's made a change to the cell phone. I have it working, and I now am at the bottom of the technological food chain. I certainly feel that way often. I think some of the audience feel that way. The question then is, how do we characterize this new generation, and how do we allow for innovation, be it data sharing, be it security, or be it social changes that are upon us? Defense transformation is occurring. Secretary Rumsfeld, United States Secretary of Defense former, started it. It continues today. I think it continues in whatever country you're from India to Turkey to Singapore to Poland to Germany to Britain to Japan, and I've spoken in most of those countries. It's a response to this changing strategic environment. How does the world relate to population shifts, to energy shifts, to global politics? How does it react to those environments? And network-centric operations, then, is that emerging military response. Much confusion over that, of whether it's a kinetic warfighting response or a social team-building response. And the answer is network-centric operations is equally capable of delivering bombs on target as it is equally capable of delivering the right information to the right people on target, or even medical facilities or medical aid. So it's a relationship between sensors, the people who carry out the mission, and the decision makers. So it's not just about technology, it's about many other areas as well. There are orders of magnitude changes taking place before our eyes. I'm sure this audience is aware of it. The first is the easy one. The first says it's an order of magnitude that more things talk to more things. That's pretty clear. Now, my refrigerator doesn't order beer for me yet, but I think that's coming, and soon I'm sure that'll be the case. Probably more important is the next item, and that is that more people are talking to more people ever before. Now, whether you're a parent and you're concerned whether a child's talking to a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or more ominously, some of you wish they wouldn't talk to, the fact is that peering and connectiveness is taken as an order of expectation, by people today, and it's all over. And that impacts organizations. Organizations may appear to be lined up with a hierarchical line diagram, but frankly, the communities of interest that always existed now are able to talk and share data and share information and share videos in a way they never could before. And that causes real stresses in what command and control used to be considered. In fact, some people consider it coordination and cooperation rather than command and control. Sort of interesting. And the other news is if you're uncomfortable with all these changes, that's not good because they're going to take place in an ever-increasing velocity. The good news is if you don't like today, it will be different tomorrow. The bad news is if you don't like change, you are in real trouble, I think, for today. The impact of all that is that machines connect to machines, what I call connectivity. People talk to people, connectedness, and connectedness leads to high degrees of collaboration. And they have to collaborate then across many ways and many service-oriented architectures have a place in that as does data transfers. The next slide, I often kid in the live audience are the people who greet me on my book tour. They, of course, don't. Nobody greets me on my book tour. But what really happens is the first camera captures the image, but captures it in the wrong format, and it's not networked. It is a camera that I, as a digital fossil, use. The next camera, as you might suspect, captures the image in the right format, but isn't instantly networked. And, of course, you audience knows where I'm going. For the third one is the now infamous phone camera that captures the image in the right format and is instantly networked, and in fact can be both a security plus and a security negative. But it is real and constantly a part of almost every mobile device. So what changes does that cause? Well, I should add, it also can be used as a personal trainer, a video receiver. You can give it to your kids for parental oversight. It's everything. In fact, in many ways, it is becoming the computer of the future. So what impact does that have upon the military missions? And you could do the same thing for civilian missions or civilian businesses if you had them. Well, some of the missions remain the same but face new challenges. How do you conduct air superiority or air-to-ground support in a highly networked environment? ISR, and I apologize to the audience, stands for Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance, and that mission always existed. But now, do you have live streaming video from aircraft or overheads? Do you drop the film as they did with the U-2 years ago? How, in fact, do you share that? Some missions are becoming more important than ever before. I taught at the Army War College. I actually don't anymore with the kind introduction, but I was a visiting professor there on information operations. So how does network-centric operations impact public affairs and civil affairs? And, of course, some are brand-new missions that are brought upon us by technology. How do we manage network security? How do we work with cybersecurity? How do we react to network attacks? A wonderful discussion on Estonia when Estonia was attacked by elements throughout the world when that took place a couple months ago. So how does a country even react to cyber attack or network attack? The fact is that the cyber domain is with us and will remain with us for some period of time. I'm getting that message on my server one. I'm sorry, Josh, if you can hear me, I need some help.
Yeah. Hi, Fred. So we may just be experiencing a little bit of network congestion.
Okay.
If you've got a hard copy or another copy on your computer you'd like to reference, we'll push that updated slide to you as soon as it's ready.
Okay. Yeah, I can go. Well, okay. Do I just hit next again?
If the message is cleared, you should be seeing slide number 20.
Yeah, the message is not cleared. So just give me slide 20 and I'll talk on it. Tell me when you got slide 20.
Okay, slide 20 is available.
Okay. As you can see on slide 20, and apologize to the audience, we have some network challenges. The important thing here is that as you think through the impact of this information age, you've got to think through the impact on all of doctrine and all of techniques, processes, and procedures. Go ahead to the next slide, and go actually to slide 22, if you would. I can't change them now. Slide 22, the good news is if you're comfortable with PowerPoint and email, like I am, you in fact belong to the new world. Well, not so fast. If you go to slide 23 and 24, you will see that the digital immigrants among us actually belong in a world of instant Facebook and YouTubes and networking, social networks. And as those social networks occur, those change everything. And a question you might ask yourself in an organization or military is how are those using social networks today? How are they using shared applications? How are they doing instant messaging and blogging? Those are events that are taking place on a routine basis with our immigrants. And our question really is, how do the systems that we provide today provide that information? Okay, I'm slowly catching up here. Just a second to the audience. And just one moment, I will be with you on the webinar. So the old world, if you will, and the new world have to bridge between them. There's some interesting literature written about that. One of the books I like is The World is Flat. If you haven't read that, that's useful to sort of describe it. This whole idea of gaming is fascinating. Organizations now often coordinate their whole activities while playing a game. Things like that, I think, are fascinating to observe and try to understand. So it is more than a cultural phenomena. It impacts our operations, becomes a surrogate command and control. It becomes challenging as we move toward lower and lower use of bandwidth and writing existing infrastructure. So companies that are emerging now that had telephone systems that are wireless, now can they handle video exchange and web TV? The impact then overall is that peering or self-organization becomes critical to organizations, global action in the information domain. And probably the last one I'll spend just a second on, because I think it's a challenge to people out in the audience, is how do you establish incentives for these digital natives to operate and reduce the disincentives that may be existing in any organization, military or civilian. So what's an example of a digital immigrant? Well, here we have a slide. I built this for the United States Air Force. You could build one similar to your Army, Air Force, Navy, or your business, where the providers, the immigrants here, kind of understand chat, may have gotten involved in a blog, but probably not. It's clueless about podcasting and Wheeze and wikis. On the other hand, the employees he's employing or she's employing are perfectly comfortable. In fact, resent the fact if they don't have a wireless phone and constantly involved, and don't view the web as a newspaper to read, but rather as a coffee shop to use. The effect is then that we must provide this connectiveness on a continuing basis, and we have to work it into our processes. This is a quiz that was worked up for me. I'm not the author of it, but quiz was worked up for me, and I think we're going to take a chance to give the audience a chance to take the quiz. Is that correct?
Yes, that is. Thanks, Fred. So everyone, if you wouldn't mind just tally up 1 point for every one of the 12 questions that you can answer yes to. We are going to release a poll where you can input your response. So first we'll just let you go through all of those 12 questions. And then if you want to, we will push the poll up now. And you can put your answers. I'd like to see how many people from the audience fall into each of the different categories. And we're just going to give you a few more seconds for you to be able to input your answers here. Now, I personally am a naturalized citizen, but I have no idea which is more difficult to get into, Facebook or MySpace, although I do have accounts on both, so I suppose that's good, but I don't know which is more selective.
One way to think about it, Kimberly, as we're getting the results in, is if you and I went to a place that sold video games and took a look at the young children playing them, the young teenagers and the young 9 and 10-year-olds, and we ask ourselves, how is that child learning to learn differently by playing with a game, interactive, than they did by being taught by their parents and teachers, or being taught by TV or reading books? And once again, I don't suggest it's better or worse, but it may be different. And you may have seen that in some of your nieces and nephews and friends.
Let's take a look at the results and see how our audience may be. Okay. Very interesting. So we've got a good mix from the old world and immigrant, and actually more naturalized citizens than I would have expected. Welcome to all of you. And I think you should get an extra point just for being on this webinar in this scale.
Certainly, the webinar is a sign of at least naturalized citizen, and as I say, your speaker today considers himself an immigrant, hopefully not going back to fossil old world status, but it is a chance. I would love to hear more from the audience on it. It's a very good mix, and it's an exciting audience to talk to.
Wonderful. Okay, back to you, Fred, for a continuation of your presentation.
Okay. We're going to shift gears a little bit now from the immigrant native situation to really talk about, well, how do we deal with this now? The emerging theory of war, if you will, and I, as an author of it, have to be humble. I would not put myself in the same position of Clausewitz, who wrote On War, or Sun Tzu, who wrote Art of War some 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. But the book was an attempt to say warfare and everything really changes in the crucible of information. Other authors who have done a good job on this is The World is Flat, I think was excellent, Blown to Bits. And my most recent popular books, and I get no money from these at all from the authors, is The Starfish and the Spider and Wikinomics. And as I suggested here, those of us who are immigrants and old world and maybe some naturalized citizens see the Internet as a newspaper. We read it, we reference it, but we don't, in fact, go to it as a coffee shop, as I think the digital natives on this webinar would look at. At least I think so. So how does this relate then to network-centric warfare and operations? This is an older slide, but I think it was useful for this audience, and it really says that the warfare leverages new relationships between weapons, sensors, platforms, and decision makers. It has to have an information grid. You have to have something for which the information to flow over. That can be a wired grid, a wireless grid, or a combination. Most of all, it requires new thinking. We have to organize our processes in a new way to include how we use sensors and how we use people and how we use information. The operations portion then is how do you conduct these operations and how do you take advantage of this operational tempo and increased operational tempo. The next key is a slide that can sometimes be used if you want to sort of express the information domain, cognitive and social domains, and the physical domains, and where information falls. And when I talk about the tenets of network-centric operations publicly, these are the 4 tenets that I usually use. And as you can see, digital natives and digital immigrants see these domains differently now per their upbringing, or at least I hypothesized they do. So the other thing it does is it requires, at least I believe it requires, an evolutionary acquisition. Our acquisition approach is to bind things that allow us to enter the information world is considerably different than buying large presses for press releases or manufacturing machines for automobiles or tanks or howitzers for the military. Rather, it requires continuous user involvement, a series of rapid prototypes, and I test a little. And this is also a difficult thing to get past the accountants and the testers. So let me take a couple minutes and take the last 6 or 7 minutes I've got and take you through some network warfare examples. What you see on the screen now is the grid. The grid is the blue. The red, if you can see it, would be a sensor network, and the green would be a engagement network. I actually use the word grid to be more enduring, and the other two are transient. The first case here is we have people accessing the sensor grid. These can be guys and gals on the ground, or it could be aircraft. They locate the target. The target is then passed to the command and control feature. The command and control folks can be in the air or not. They became a member of the command and control issues, and they track the target or the effort. They pass that then to the delivery vehicle, in this case a B-25 that my father used to fly. That B-25, in fact, passes that information to the weapon on it or to another weapons platform if it's a cyber attack. And now the most important thing occurs, and the most important thing is that command now passes back to the sensor, the original person. So what you have here is an example of a whole loop or a whole continuous loop where the most important item is agility. It's agility in platforms. It's agility in information technology. It's agility in personnel. And crossing all lines is the requirement to have trust. I'll take you through one more example here before passing it off, and the next example has to do with the key to understanding. I'm sorry, and one more. The key to understanding then is how to fight it in both fiber and cyber. This next example is, well, how expensive of it? Well, this is an example in recent combat where a ground forward air observer, and that's the GFAC, can see the target. He can only see the target by passing it through a UAV, an unattended vehicle, up in the air. In this case, he tried to pass the information to a flight of U.S. Navy jet aircraft, F-18 Hornets. When he tried to pass that information to the Hornet, he was unable to describe the target adequately in words. And then the miracle occurred. The miracle occurred when the U.S. forces decided that if they were truly going to share data and share vision, they had to share the picture. And they shared the picture by, in fact, providing another set of aircraft with the ability to both see the target and, more importantly, to share that information that they saw with the direct picture of the ground. So now the ground observer and the pilot saw the exact same picture. When that picture was shared in exactly that manner, then the coordination to engage the target safely, not hitting other ground people, not hitting other civilians, was able to be accomplished. And in this case, it was accomplished in about 8 minutes and 30 seconds. And I may have to have help in advancing the slides on this one. So if we could go now to slide 51. And really talk about, the cyber arena. In fact, what I would do for those advancing, if you could skip all the way to slide 50, there we go. So network-centric warfare is a way to fight. It does, in fact, allow us just a bit of a challenge here. It can be fought in any domain. Okay, I should be on slide, there we go. It can be fought in any domain that includes the cyber domain, and the cyber domain is a domain of war which requires command and control, coordination, the same as any other domain of war. And in fact, on this slide, you actually see on slide 54, you actually see the Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Defense definition of cyberspace. And the U.S., as the other countries, are working through how to do this. So the changing nature of warfare, then, implementation of new operational concepts, outlooks and effects have global consequences, and levels of operation to include civilians and multi-country. So future warfare challenges are real. the information age in which we operate is real. The question is, and the shift between digital natives and digital immigrants is real, so our challenge then is to work between them. An example, for instance, is some people think warfare will be fought in a very loose, agile opponent, and that's in contrast to the rather rigid hierarchy. My feeling probably is that we really have a combination or a hybrid of organizations in this thing. And the real key, and I'll use this from a book, Starfish and the Spider, is we want to move from being a spider that can be immobilized by the loss of a leg or killed by loss of a head to a morph between a spider and a starfish. A spider has no head but regenerates correctly, so we want to be somewhere between a starfish and a spider. The effect of that is to be able to have organizational structures like we do show here on slides 59, and that organizational structure isn't hierarchical but is a series of communities of interest. So wrapping this up now, we're really seeking out agility. Everything is a balance between cyber-physical, information assurance, and operational flexibility, kinetic and non-kinetic. And the real key then is how do we balance all of these things in a way that allows us the movement from an engineering perspective, from an economic perspective, and from a leadership perspective. So how agile are your systems and what are your feedback loops? The last two slides then really say this is the challenge or environment today as I see it philosophically, and I have to tell you as a warrior, this is what we really see on the ground today in many cases. This was a picture live, and this is really how we often have to fight. So we must address the technology and processes together. Infrastructure is an entry fee. Superiority is a goal. It's transient, and we need greater integration between the separate planning functions. We need to take full advantage of the commercial technologies. Information superiority is not possible without trust. And wrapping it up, our goal is to get connected and to share information, achieve those net-centric operations with the real intent is to have no warrior, no one operates alone on the battlefield. And I did take this slide from a recent military conference, and I'll sort of leave you with this one and hand it over to Brian. Soldiers can go weeks without food, days without water, but only minutes without data. And I appreciate everybody's time and effort in working through this, and I'll pass this over to Brian.
Thank you so much, Fred. That was fantastic. I really like this last slide especially. It really goes to show the point of how crucial it is to get the right information to our armed forces at the right time so that they can use it to be successful. And with that, I want to introduce Brian Clark, who's going to be our next speaker. Brian is the VP of Technical Services at Objectivity. He has over 30 years of software industry experience and is responsible for all the systems engineering and professional services for Objectivity's customer base. As a part of that, he has overseen numerous implementations of our database management system in mission-critical government applications. And he's going to talk briefly about some of the examples of ways that data can really be processed and mined to get exactly the information you need to the right person at the right time. And with that, I'd like to welcome you, Brian, for our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Kimberly. And thank you, Fred. That was a very enlightening presentation. Just happens that I was in the UK shortly after the London bombings in July 2005. And while I was there, I heard a term I'd never heard before called the last safe moment. And a few weeks after the bombings, the authorities attempted to arrest and shot a young Brazilian living in London and working in London. You could say that was the wrong information to the wrong people at the wrong time. So we need to be able to rapidly provide the right information to the right people at the right time. Or you could say that time is of the essence and knowledge is the key. So how does Objectivity help build these sort of systems? If we first address complexity, as Fred was indicating, a lot of the things that we're dealing with in the intelligence world is to do with connectivity. Things are connected to other things. People are more connected. Even your phones or PDAs or even household appliances are getting connected these days. All this leads to a lot of relationships that need managing and navigating. The object model supports this, and in Objectivity, we directly store the objects and, even more importantly, the relationships directly in the database. So a complex model can be manipulated and stored in the Objectivity database. But of course, while managing this complexity, people want faster response times. So we need to provide performance. And the fact that the objects are stored natively in the database means that the applications can directly access those objects as objects. If the data was stored in a relational database, then we'd actually have to go through a mapping layer to rebuild those objects out of rows and columns of a table. And of course, that would be a performance hit at runtime, and it also takes longer to develop the systems. Now, Objectivity's distributed architecture is unique peer-to-peer architecture. What that really means is that any clients anywhere in the network can access any database server anywhere in the network. So again, if you imagine some of Fred's examples, where we've got the ground forces connected to the air forces, connected to the Navy forces, lots of many-to-many relationships, and spread throughout the network. Now, we are a client-server architecture, but with a difference. And that difference is that we're not a central server architecture. But the Objectivity kernel, the database kernel, which is typically under a couple of megs, is actually linked into the client application. And then the servers are very lightweight servers for specific functionality, such as the lock server handles concurrent access within a federation, and the remote data servers handle remote access by the client. So you can imagine this as a many-to-many connectedness of many clients anywhere in the network connected to many data servers anywhere in the network. With this sort of architecture, then, it leads to our scalability. We can incrementally add rather than replace clients and servers. So again, if you think of a central server technology, you run out of processing power, then you have to replace that server with a bigger server. With the Objectivity architecture, as I say, it's possible to incrementally add rather than replace, and that would be both clients and server machines. This would then lead to the reliability of the Objectivity system, that we're able to replicate system resources and databases throughout the network. Working in a distributed network like this, of course, there could be many machines of many different types. So Objectivity's flexibility supports the creation and querying of objects in any language, C++, Java, C#, and the interoperability across different platforms. So you could have a mix of Windows machines with Unix, with Linux. So complete interoperability across platforms and compilers. So here's an example showing that the challenges of today's fusion engines are, as Fred was saying, there are a lot more information from a lot more distributed inputs that needs to be processed and made very quickly available to the end users of the system. As an example of the ingest rates that we support, in one benchmark, we were actually ingesting over 3 million objects per second, creating over 1 terabyte per hour of data. And this was on continuous for 24 hours. Then you need to be able to process the raw data into meaningful intelligence. Not only store the data objects, but we allow the creation of other data structures to support the diverse uses of the data, such as indices, maps, and a variety of collections. That way, the end users can access the data not just by querying on values of data, but can use these other data structures to find the data, the information, very quickly. Next, I'll talk about 3 examples where Objectivity is used in these types of data fusion engines. The first one, slide similar to one of Fred's, is actually Objectivity is at the heart of the NCCT fusion engine, supporting the NCCT application. Objectivity is used to store and manage vast amounts of disparate information coming from the Air Forces, the Land Forces, and the Navy. This type of data that gets fused together includes geospatial and sensor data. So not only do you get the target, but you can see the surroundings and the actual location all in one picture. And then the users of this system have said that it can reduce the time to accurately locate and identify targets by more than 90%. Very impressive figure. So if we look at why Objectivity was chosen, you'll see many of the things I mentioned on the problem slide. So we see that there's numerous types of data, different types of data with different characteristics. Scalability was important, as well as distribution, timeliness, the right information to the right people at the right time. People need a lot of data, a lot of intelligence, and they need it fast. Ability to add additional intelligence. This is very important because, as Fred mentioned, there's this term, the flat world. Everything connected to everything. Things are changing all the time, and the rate of change is also increasing. So the ability to accept new types into the system without having to take the system down is very important. The next example shows an application that's actually called Analyst Support Architecture, and it's used to correlate multi-source data to provide a fused picture, so lots of different types coming together to provide a single common operational picture. The data is then compared against a knowledge model that provides an expectation. And the way the system works is if the current data coming in, the fused picture, does not meet the expectation for that sort of model, then an alert is sent to the analyst. At this point, the analyst can quickly drill down across any of the sources of data, whether it's geospatial or textual or email or voice traffic. They can get down to the individual pieces of information to really see what caused the anomaly. And Objectivity was chosen because of its faster development time. Again, storing the objects directly in the database eliminates the mapping layer. Scalability was important, reliability, and in this case, the dynamic schema capabilities that allow new types of information to be created in the system without having to take the application down to recompile it. Also, the support for complex models natively in the database, so it's very easy to work with from the developer's point of view, and it's multi-platform support because this application is actually deployed in Windows and Unix. And it was actually deployed in a 3-tier architecture, which I'll just mention at the end. The next slide is another application, this time called Threads. It stands for Threat, Human, Reporting, Evaluation, Analysis, and Display System. And it assists counter-terrorists and force protection analysts to corroborate human intelligence sources and correlate these threads of evidence with other sources, leading to actionable intelligence. Now, that means that Objectivity, again, is used as the scalable data fusion repository, and it compares the incoming information with historical data and knowledge models stored within the application and again alerts the analyst to any anomalies. And again, Objectivity was chosen because of its proven technology that's reliable, scalable, and outperformed other solutions. And in fact, some benchmarks were actually run, and we were the top solution. The next slide shows a common architecture for this, what I would call the next generation of data fusion engines. The first generation were actually built with Objectivity, or what I would call static. In that case, the class definitions are compiled into the application. And then if you want to change the definition or add a new sensor, you would have to stop the application, rebuild the application, and redeploy. Now, with Objectivity's dynamic schema, we can actually build applications that are resilient to these changes. In addition, we're seeing more systems being built similar to this architecture. Again, it's like the three-tier architecture of the ASA deployment. Uses service-oriented architecture components, and it also uses a model-driven architecture. The model-driven architecture allows the application to respond dynamically to new or changing requirements. So if you add sort of new classes or new sensors, new sensor definitions, then typically the screen layouts, whatever the analyst sees, would have to change as well. With the implementation using a model-driven architecture, then the application dynamically responds and rebuilds the screens without having to take the application down. Then new data can come in either through the middle tier, as shown here, or in fact it could be directly fed into the legacy systems that you see in the bottom left of the diagram. Then what's interesting in this architecture is as new data comes in, then new intelligence is found, new relationships between existing data, new relationships between new data coming in. All that can be created dynamically and then stored in what we show as the distributed storage in the bottom right. Now, the nice thing about that is, as that knowledge base builds up, then the actual information available to the analyst, the access to that information, actually speeds up. So in this sort of architecture, the application really gets faster as the knowledge base fills up and finds new information. So at that point, I'd like to hand back to Kimberly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brian. That was really interesting. I loved seeing those different architecture types that are already being used. I just want to summarize a little bit of our presentation with just a few words about Objectivity. Objectivity is a market leader in high-performance database engines, and we've been around for almost 20 years. In fact, we're coming up on our 20-year anniversary in July of 2008, so we're really excited about that. Our flagship product, Objectivity DB, is at the core of a number of mission-critical defense and intelligence applications already in the U.S. and the allied countries. I'm going to open up the discussion for questions, but before that, I wanted to push a survey out to you. If you could just take a moment to complete this survey about the webinar, that would be great. We'd really appreciate it. It just kind of lets us know how we're doing, what your interests are going forward, and how we can help you more in the future. So with that in play, it'll just take a few minutes to fill out that survey, and again, we'd really appreciate it. With that, I want to start our Q&A session. We've gotten a number of great questions that have come in from the audience, and I just want to start with question number 6 for Fred. Fred, one of our audience members is asking, evolutionary acquisition, at least for large-scale net-centric programs, has not worked well yet due to difficulties in requirements establishment and getting agreement between diverse military and government agencies. Simulation capabilities, sell-off testing, establishment of TPMs, and the additional cost time involved. How can this be overcome?
Well, thank you for the question, and it is a relevant question. I suppose the good news is that in the U.S. at least, and this is I can't speak for other countries' acquisition processes, But in the United States, there has been a recognition that acquisition reform needs to take place, and it has, in fact, been pursued with some degree of vigor. Having said that, there is still a significant challenge in the ability to react to changing environments in the information area, and I will tell you that I agree with the frustration that large-scale net-centric programs and large-scale software programs in general have had a challenge on the acquisition process. Part of it is that they, of course, never really end. They're continuously under development, and as I alluded in the conversation, that confuses and befuddles the acquisition authorities, the testing authorities, and the accounting authorities. So what are some of the ways that it's being looked at? I think there's some effort being made and some success being seen in spiral development and the ability to throw off capabilities in a regulated sense, if you will. Every X number of months or per some event, you throw off the capability where you add the capability to either the warfighter or the general manager or the company, and it is costed, it is profited, and it is tested per those capability cycles, rather than an end state that we are often asked to see. So issues like the large acquisition in the Army of the future combat system, there will be a series of capability rollouts, and I think we're seeing that in other areas. Those capability rollouts, seem to be a way of working around this highly complex single development, single delivery problem, where we often then find it very hard to test. We find it very hard to train for, and often too late. So I think the spiral development process, married to the testing and delivery process, is the way to go. We see some evidence of that. I would not say that it has been captured and made part of the formal acquisition process, to my knowledge, but we do see some evidences of it. Best answer I can give on that one.
I think that's great. Thank you so much. Brian, the next question is going to be for you, and that's going to be question number 5. How do you separate data, such as unique assets and locations, from non-privileged groups?
Okay. This would fall into the area that we're of our distributed architecture, that any client anywhere can access any data server anywhere. So the first piece is that rather than a central server where all the data is located in one place on one central server, the data can be distributed across multiple machines. And so you could have very sensitive data on one machine and control the access to that machine, less sensitive data on another machine and control the access to that machine.
Great.
So I think that's the best answer.
I think that sounds pretty good. Okay, I'm going to go back to Fred with one more question. I'm just going to do a little bit of a back and forth here. It says, your presentation encourages one to adopt the adage in the warfighter of trust but verify. In a weapons control environment, one must verify and trust without a significant level of proof prior to weapons release, which is not necessarily acceptable. How do you see this changing?
That really is a great question. I'll give 2 examples that perhaps can shed light on it. We are seeing an increasing number of organizations utilizing blogs, sometimes on the classified and unclassified level, where information is put out through the organization. There is an accountability of who puts it in, but there's a tremendous breaking down of the traditional lines of bureaucracy or relationship, and we see that in some of the major commands in the United States, and I think we're also seeing it somewhat in combat. Now, the question is directed, and so that's in the trust but verify. So the verification comes kind of like the Wikimedia verification. It's self-verifying that corrections are made by people who say, gee, they got that slightly wrong. Here's the real story. can you get that inside the loop of a weapons system that is responding to a sensor input, such as a gun firing from radar input on it, which of course does require an immediate degree of verification and trust? I think as we enter the networked age and the networked environment and the information age, there are some real risks to those systems which previously did not exist. As we open up weapon systems and their sensors to even larger number of sensor inputs rather than just a directed sensor input, then we open up an area of both cyber interference, and we had some of that during this when my network wasn't as good as everybody else's, and I couldn't keep up with the slides, all the way to people putting in information that would perhaps confuse it. So the verification process of the data in a near real-time environment, I think, is probably one of the most significant technical mathematical challenges we have with it. It's really a very great question. I guess my observation in this one is it's likely to get worse before it gets better. It certainly is going to provide some really good master's and doctoral thesis work.
Okay, great. So our next question, I'm going to push back to Brian, and this is kind of a combined question. How does Objectivity DB react to unreliable networks, and how does it support streaming, CQL?
Okay, the first part is, again, falls down to the distributed nature of the database. And what we can do is replicate system services, such as catalogs and the lock server process that controls concurrent access. And then that way, within what we call the federation, we can partition the federation into autonomous partitions that can actually work standalone. That way, if the network, if you're in an unreliable network and the network breaks, then either side of the network, as long as they're partitioned correctly, can continue to operate. Then when the network is brought back, they will cooperate and resync themselves.
Great.
The second part about the streaming is really the database itself can support any type that you can define in an object-oriented language, such as C++ or Java or C#. And underlying that, we have what we call a V-array, which is a dynamically varying array of any particular type. So it could be a V-array of something as simple as an unsigned integer or 8-bit integer, a V-array of characters, or a V-array of some type that you've defined. So, for instance, we've had users that would stream in video into the database, and basically the underlying structure is a V-array of unsigned 8-bit integers. Alternatively, if you think about a video, it's not really just a sequence of bytes. It's actually a sequence of frames. So you could define the video, or you could define a type for a frame, and then the video would be stored as a sequence or V-array of frames. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Our next question is directed again to Fred. Fred, this is question number 17. It says, Mr. Stein, we acknowledge the fact that technology is improving connectivity and information movement. Could you comment on the improvements needed in the area of knowledge management to make Network-Centric environment more effective?
I can certainly give it a shot. I as a matter of course, have generally confined myself to information sharing and situational awareness, and sometimes I will even be so bold to go into situational understanding, which I think begins to break into the domain of knowledge management. That's a tough term today, and I think many others are struggling with it. But what I've seen in visiting units in overseas environments and in the training issues in the United States, both where I live here in Texas and elsewhere, I see the following. One, ever-increasing needs by the commander, we in the military will call commanders critical information requirements. The setting of what the commander is interested in becomes even more critical as we have these number of information sources and amount of information from these information sources. Now, of course, the risk of what they call the Commander Information Requirements, or CCIRs, is and it's a new book called Black Swan that I think is excellent. It talks about the thing you didn't ask about. So, but first of all, you try and understand what the staffs and groups should be looking at, and that is a self-limiting area that gets the information then into how we might get into knowledge or situational understanding. Knowledge management, I think, has two key attributes. It's the attribute of managing the information systems, which are often related to functions like intelligence or logistics or maneuver or defense. There's a management of those systems, then there's the management of the information of those systems, and then there's the collation of the information as it pertains to a particular operational environment or operational mission. I think one of the areas of great interest in the current working on knowledge management is trying to understand how to tag information successfully, and it goes beyond just the date timestamps. But some form of tagging, it can be done with extended markup language or others, that then presents the opportunity for search engines of various kinds to actually get into a knowledge management query basis. It is clearly the significant next step. I think in knowledge management, we quest for some sort of tenets there as well as we have tenets of network-centric operations and warfare, and I think a better definition of what do we mean by it. The good news is I think there are a lot of people working on it. I think the tagging is more successful. Queries are more successful. I'm not so sure that we have made as much progress in the ability to understand how networks work, and I think we're even further behind in sort of understanding the implications of these social networks. It's a vital role. Clearly, without understanding, you can never get to knowledge or even a higher order of wisdom. My best shot at it.
Okay. Well, I thought that sounded pretty good. We have time for one last question. I think we're a little bit over the hour, but one last question will go to Brian. Brian, that's question number 16. And I'm not sure how much of this you can answer, but which agency and services in the DoD and federal and national arena do you currently work with? And I'm actually going to push a slide to the audience that has some logos of some of the companies that Objectivity works with, including government agencies. Brian, could you mention a few of them?
That's a very good question, but I'm not sure what I can really say. Other than many of the three-lettered agencies, in the DC Beltway, are using Objectivity for a variety of intelligence and fusion applications. Other than that, I think it would be best answered offline.
Sure. Of course, some of the projects that we work in may be confidential, so but this slide at least will show you a few of the logos of people that we can say that we work with. So with that, I think that's about as much time as we have today, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and a special thank you to our speakers, Fred Stein and Brian Clark. Thank you. If we weren't able to get to your questions, we'll be sure to follow up after the event to answer directly. Also, a reminder, the slides and the presentation will be available online for you to review at your leisure. And for more information on this topic, you can visit our website at www.objectivity.com for case studies, white papers, more webinars, and other information. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.